Imagine living in ancient Egypt as a woman with no rights, no voice, and no escape from the horrors that awaited you. What if I told you that death would have been a mercy compared to what many enslaved women faced at the hands of Egyptian nobles? The stories I'm about to share with you today are not just tales of physical abuse or hard labor. They reveal a systematic pattern of cruelty that targeted the most vulnerable members of society. These are historical accounts that many textbooks skip over, but they're crucial for understanding the true nature of power and oppression in one of history's greatest civilizations. Today, we're going to uncover the dark reality of what Egyptian nobles did to enslaved women. We'll explore the evidence from ancient papyrus documents, tomb inscriptions, and archaeological findings that paint a disturbing picture. This isn't just ancient history. Understanding these patterns helps us recognize similar injustices throughout human civilization. So stay with me as we journey back over 3,000 years to examine one of humanity's darkest chapters. Let me start by setting the scene for you. Ancient Egypt wasn't just pyramids and pharaohs living in luxury. It was a society built on the backs of millions of enslaved people, many of whom were women captured during military campaigns. These women came from Nubia, the Levant, Libya, and other neighboring regions. When Egyptian armies returned victorious, they brought with them thousands of prisoners who would never see their homelands again. But here's where the story takes a particularly dark turn. While enslaved men were typically put to work in mines, quarries, or construction projects, enslaved women faced a different kind of horror. Egyptian nobles saw these women not just as workers, but as objects for their personal entertainment and pleasure. The ancient papyrus, known as the Wilbur Papyrus, contains records that describe how noble families would purchase enslaved women specifically for what they called household duties. But these duties went far beyond cooking and cleaning. Archaeological evidence from noble tombs shows that wealthy Egyptians often kept dozens of enslaved women in their households. These women were forced to serve not just the head of the household, but also his sons, male relatives, and even honored guests. The worst part? This was considered completely normal and even a sign of wealth and status. One particularly disturbing account comes from the tomb of a noble named Mereruka at Saqqara. The wall paintings show enslaved women being examined by potential buyers, much like livestock at a market. The hieroglyphic texts accompanying these images describe how nobles would inspect these women's bodies to determine their suitability for different types of service. But the physical violations were just the beginning. Egyptian nobles developed psychological torture methods that were designed to break these women's spirits completely. They would often separate mothers from their children, using the children as leverage to ensure compliance. One papyrus document from the Middle Kingdom describes how a noble named Senusret would threaten to sell a woman's child to foreign traders if she showed any signs of resistance. The children themselves became tools of manipulation, creating an impossible choice for these mothers. Another common practice was the deliberate mixing of languages and cultures within households. Nobles would intentionally place women from different regions together, making communication difficult and preventing the formation of support networks. This isolation was carefully calculated to increase psychological distress and dependence on their captors. The ancient text known as the Brooklyn Papyrus lists the names and origins of 95 enslaved people in a single household. Of these, 73 were women from at least 12 different regions, speaking different languages and following different customs. This wasn't coincidental. It was a deliberate strategy to prevent unity and rebellion. Perhaps most horrifying was the practice of ritual humiliation that took place during religious festivals. During certain celebrations, enslaved women were forced to perform degrading acts in front of large crowds as entertainment. These events were considered religious observances, which meant that resistance could be punished as blasphemy against the gods. The Papyrus Harris I, one of the longest papyrus documents ever found, contains detailed records of temple activities during the reign of Ramesses III. It describes how enslaved women were forced to participate in ceremonies where they were publicly stripped, examined, and subjected to various forms of abuse while crowds cheered. The document presents these events as offerings to the gods, showing how religion was used to justify and normalize these practices. But the cruelty didn't end there. Egyptian nobles also practiced something historians call selective breeding with their enslaved populations. Women who gave birth to children were often separated from those children at a very young age. The children would then be raised by other enslaved women, while the mothers were assigned to different duties. This practice served multiple purposes. It prevented strong maternal bonds that might lead to rebellion, and it created a new generation of people who knew no other life than slavery. Documents from the reign of Amenhotep II describe how the pharaoh himself gave enslaved women as gifts to his nobles, with specific instructions on how they should be managed for maximum productivity. These instructions included detailed methods for preventing escapes, breaking down resistance, and maintaining control over large numbers of people. One of the most chilling aspects of these historical records is how meticulously documented everything was. Egyptian nobles kept detailed records of their enslaved populations, including physical descriptions, origins, skills, and even personality traits. The Edwin Smith papyrus, famous for its medical content, also contains notes about treating injuries inflicted during discipline sessions on enslaved people. These medical notes reveal the systematic nature of the abuse. Nobles had access to medical knowledge specifically to keep their victims alive and functional. Archaeological excavations at noble estates have uncovered living quarters for enslaved people that tell their own story. These spaces were deliberately designed to be overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and easily monitored. At the site of Lahun, archaeologists found housing areas where up to 20 people were forced to live in spaces smaller than a modern bathroom. The remains found in these areas show signs of malnutrition, physical abuse, and various diseases that come from overcrowding and poor sanitation. But perhaps the most revealing evidence comes from the few written accounts left by the enslaved people themselves. A small collection of ostraca, pieces of pottery used for writing, contains messages written in various languages by enslaved women. These messages, found hidden in walls and floors of noble residences, provide first-hand accounts of daily life. One message, written in broken Egyptian hieratic script, translates roughly to, "My name was Casey. I came from the south. They took my children. I do not know if I will see the sun tomorrow." Another simply says, "Remember us. We were here. We suffered." These brief messages represent some of the only direct voices we have from these women, and they paint a picture of desperation and hopelessness that's hard to imagine. The psychological impact of this treatment was exactly what the nobles intended. Many of these women developed what we would now recognize as severe trauma responses. Ancient medical papyri describe symptoms that match what modern psychology identifies as complex PTSD. The nobles understood that broken spirits were easier to control than defiant ones, and they developed increasingly sophisticated methods of psychological manipulation. One particularly disturbing practice involved forcing women to participate in the abuse of other enslaved people. This created a system where victims became complicit in their own oppression, making resistance even more difficult. Documents from the New Kingdom period describe how some enslaved women were given small privileges in exchange for monitoring and reporting on other enslaved people. This created an atmosphere of distrust and fear that made organized resistance nearly impossible. The intergenerational impact of these practices was devastating. Children born into slavery and noble households were raised in this environment of constant fear and dehumanization. Many never knew their parents or their cultural origins, growing up with no sense of identity beyond their role as property. The cycle of trauma was deliberately maintained across generations, creating a population that had no memory of freedom or dignity. The evidence from ancient Egypt shows us that the abuse of enslaved women by nobles was not random cruelty, but a calculated system of control. These practices were designed to break down human dignity systematically and completely. Understanding this history is crucial because similar patterns of oppression have appeared throughout human civilization. The methods may change, but the underlying dynamics of power, control, and dehumanization remain remarkably consistent. By studying these dark chapters of history, we can better recognize and prevent similar injustices in our own time. The voices of those enslaved women in ancient Egypt were nearly lost to history, but the evidence of their suffering remains. We owe it to their memory to remember these stories and learn from them. If this video has opened your eyes to this hidden aspect of ancient history, please like and share it to help others learn about these important historical truths. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on how we can ensure these stories are not forgotten. And subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the parts of history that often get overlooked, but are essential for understanding our world today. Remember, history isn't just about the powerful and famous. It's also about the countless individuals who suffered in silence, but whose experiences shaped the course of human civilization. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.